Hi and welcome to Whisky Shared. You're watching my review of SMWS, the Moroccan porridge smuggler strikes again. I'm Toby and you're watching Whisky Shared. Welcome to my review of SMWS 72.77, the Moroccan porridge smuggler strikes again. This is my third of 3 reviews from SMWS, and this particular one is a Miltonduff. Miltonduff is a distillery that I do not have any familiarity with, and this particular whisky is 9 years old. It's aged in first fill ex-bourbon, it's 55.1% ABV, and it's one of 247 bottles. It retailed for £55.80, and as always, it's non-chill filtered, it's natural colour, it's single cask and cask strength. Should we find out what it tastes like? On to the whisky. So before I start nosing and tasting, let's have a quick look at the colour. I'd say that's like a straw colour. It really is light, but you may not be able to see that so well on camera. Let's start with the nose. Okay, so this is quite interesting. The first thing I get is milk chocolate. It is rather creamy, that sort of creamy milk chocolate on the nose. And then it moves on to like pear drops. There's that sort of slightly synthetic pear sort of sweetness. I'm then starting to get like rhubarb and custard sweet. So there's that sort of slightly sour note and slightly sweetness. But I'm struggling to get anything else. Let's move on to the palate. Yeah, there may be some undue influence from the name, but the first thing I get on the palate is oats, funnily enough. There's that sort of slightly dry, powdery, sort of oaty cereal note that comes through first. It's not overly hot though, at first sip at 55.1%, but there is, I would say there is a reasonable amount of heat, as you'd expect, but it isn't as hot as you might imagine. Let's have another sip. Yeah, so coming through now is like orchard fruits. I'm getting like apples, I'm getting pears. I'd say it's more like green apples, and the sweetness that comes with those isn't overly high. There's also a hint of like white wine. There's a slightly sort of dry white wine note that I'm getting in the background. Let's have one final sip. Yeah, so moving on, I'd say I really am struggling to get much more, but there is an interesting sort of like fizzy sort of pear note. That orchard fruits that I was picking up has started to go a little bit fizzy on my palate, and it's definitely not unpleasant, but there is a little bit of dryness still lingering from that sort of white wine note. In terms of finish, I'd say it's quite long. There is some bitter wood, there is some apple skins, but there isn't much more. I suppose potentially there is that sort of sweetness that's carrying through from the sort of orchard fruits and the sort of pear note I picked up. That does sort of linger, but does dissipate and get overwhelmed by the dry wood note quite quickly. In terms of value, well, as I said, this was £55.80, and I've got nothing to compare this against other than similar Speysides of similar ages from SMWS, which are obviously cask strength, single cask, and non-chill filtered natural colour. I think price wise, I don't think it's massively over where it should be. But it probably is a smidge higher than I'd want to pay. But it could also be because Miltonduff isn't a popular distillery or a very common distillery, so maybe that's why it has an ever so slight premium. But it's always good to try whiskies from a distillery you're not familiar with. This particular whisky, I'm sure, goes into some of Chivas blends because it is owned by Chivas, who are Pernod Ricard. So potentially it does go in blends that you may well be familiar with. But I would say in this, guys, it's a little bit lackluster. It's not anything special, but it is a nice sipping whiskey. I think it doesn't need water, which is always a bonus. And yeah, it's always good to try a distillery you're not familiar with. If you've tried Miltonduff, or indeed a SMWS Miltonduff, let me know in the comments as always. And if you're not familiar with SMWS at all, and this is your first sort of foray into what SMWS can do, then have a look in the description. I'll give you a link to the SMWS themselves. Hopefully you found this interesting, and I'll see you next time. Stauncher.
I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, why not give it a like or a comment, and please consider subscribing for more videos like this.